Welcome to Heartline Stories. Today's story follows a billionaire who makes a decision no one saw coming. He brings his maid to a dinner filled with the wealthiest and most powerful people. But what happens when she does something that leaves everyone stunned? This isn't just another tale of glitz and glamour. It's a story about courage, unexpected surprises, and the kind of moment that changes lives. Stay tuned to see how one bold move can leave even the richest in awe. Let us know where you're watching from, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more inspiring stories. There was once a billionaire named Thomas Brooks. He was tall, sharp, and always dressed in expensive suits. Everyone in New York City knew his name. Thomas was the owner of a huge tech company, and people said he had the golden touch. Everything he touched turned into success. But Thomas had a secret. Despite all his riches, he felt lonely. His grand mansion was always quiet, except for one cheerful voice. His maid, Clara. Clara was kind and hardworking. She always hummed while she worked and had the ability to make even the dullest day feel warm and bright. She had no fancy education, but she had something Thomas admired: pure confidence and a fearless attitude. One evening, Thomas received an invitation to a high-stakes dinner. This wasn't just any dinner. It was a gathering of the richest and most powerful people in the city. Deals worth millions would be made over glasses of sparkling water and plates of fancy food. For Thomas, this dinner could mean a big win for his business. But Thomas had a problem. He was supposed to bring a guest, and he didn't want to invite someone who would only talk about money and fame. Just as he was thinking about it, Clara walked into the room holding a tray of tea. "Clara," Thomas said suddenly, "how would you like to join me for dinner tomorrow night?" Clara almost dropped the tray. "Me? At a fancy dinner? Are you joking, Mr. Brooks?" "I'm serious," Thomas said with a small smile. "You're not like anyone they've ever met. It could be interesting." Clara hesitated. "But I don't have a dress, and I wouldn't know what to say." "Leave that to me," Thomas said, and just like that, it was decided. The next evening, a car arrived to take Thomas and Clara to the dinner. Clara looked stunning in a simple yet elegant navy blue dress Thomas had arranged for her. Her curly hair was pulled back, and she wore no jewelry except for a small silver bracelet her grandmother had given her. She felt nervous but decided she wouldn't let it show. As they entered the grand ballroom, heads turned. Thomas was used to attention, but Clara wasn't. She could feel the stares and whispers. Some of the guests were even smirking. "Why would Thomas Brooks bring his maid to a dinner like this?" they murmured, but Clara held her head high. She smiled politely and stayed close to Thomas. The evening went on, and the guests began discussing business deals, stocks, and complicated tech plans. Clara listened quietly, feeling a little out of place. Then during dinner, one of the guests, a man named Mr. Harrington, turned to Clara with a sly grin. "So, Clara, what do you do?" he asked, clearly expecting her to stumble. "I'm Mr. Brooks's maid," she said honestly, her voice steady. The table went silent. Mr. Harrington chuckled. "A maid, huh? And what's your opinion on the stock market, Clara?" Clara paused, then smiled. "Well, Mr. Harrington, I might not know much about stocks, but I do know one thing. Common sense is priceless. Sometimes simple ideas are the most powerful." Her words hung in the air. Thomas looked at Clara, impressed. And as Mr. Harrington opened his mouth to reply, Clara did something no one expected. Clara leaned forward slightly, her confidence shining through. She met Mr. Harrington's gaze and continued, For example, in the kitchen, we don't overcomplicate things. If we want a great meal, we focus on the basics, fresh ingredients and good timing. Maybe the stock market could use a bit of that thinking too. People tend to overthink, don't they? The room was quiet again, but this time it wasn't an awkward silence. Several heads nodded, including Thomas's. Clara's words had struck a chord, simple as they were. Mr. Harrington, caught off guard, smiled tightly. That's an interesting perspective, he muttered, clearly unsure how to respond. Thomas took the chance to step in. Interesting indeed, he said, his voice firm yet amused. Clara has a unique way of seeing the world. Maybe that's exactly what some of us need right now. As the dinner continued, Clara found herself becoming more comfortable. She listened carefully to the conversations, occasionally chiming in with her honest, straightforward thoughts. To her surprise, some of the guests seemed genuinely interested in what she had to say. Near the end of the evening, the host of the dinner, a very elegant woman named Miss Vanderbilt, stood up to address the group. Ladies and gentlemen, I must say tonight's discussion has been fascinating, she began, her eyes scanning the room. But one person in particular has caught my attention. Clara stiffened in her seat, sensing that all eyes were turning towards her. Ms. Vanderbilt smiled warmly. Clara, I believe you've reminded us of something important tonight, the value of simplicity and sincerity. Thank you for sharing your thoughts. Clara felt her cheeks flush as the guests clapped politely. She glanced at Thomas, who gave her an encouraging nod. For the first time, she realized that her voice mattered, even in a room full of powerful people. Just as the dinner was winding down, another guest, a young entrepreneur named Chris, approached her. Clara, I loved your point about common sense, he said. I'd love to hear more about how you see the world. Maybe you could help me with something I'm working on. Clara blinked in surprise. Me? Help you? She asked. Chris chuckled. Yes, you. You've got a fresh perspective, and I think it could make a big difference. Before she could reply, Thomas stepped in. Clara's talents are limitless, he said with a proud smile. I'm sure she'd be happy to consider it. The evening ended with Clara walking out of the grand ballroom alongside Thomas, her head held high and her mind racing with possibilities. But little did she know, this was just the beginning of an adventure she never imagined. As Clara and Thomas stepped outside, the cool evening air brushed against their faces. Clara clutched her silver bracelet, deep in thought about the unexpected turn of events inside the ballroom. Never in her wildest dreams had she imagined powerful people seeking her advice. That went better than I expected, Thomas remarked, his sharp eyes sparkling with amusement. You've got a way with words, Clara. Clara smiled shyly but quickly shook her head. I don't know, Mr. Brooks. I'm just a maid. These people live in a world I don't understand. Thomas stopped walking and turned to face her. You're much more than a maid, Clara. You have something most people in that room don't. Authenticity. And that's rare, even in a room full of billionaires. Just as Clara was about to respond, a familiar voice called out, Clara! Wait up! It was Chris, the young entrepreneur from the dinner. He jogged up to them, slightly out of breath. Clara, I wasn't kidding earlier. I could really use your help, Chris said with a grin. He pulled out a sleek notepad and began to scribble something. I'm working on a project that's all about connecting with regular people, like my new app idea. But I've been stuck for weeks. You've got a fresh outlook, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. Clara blinked, taken aback. She had no idea what kind of thoughts he expected from her. Before she could say anything, Thomas stepped in. If Clara agrees, she'll take a look. But give her time, Chris. Tonight's been a lot. Chris nodded, his enthusiasm undimmed. Of course. Here's my contact info. He handed Clara a card with his name and number, then waved as he headed off down the street. Clara stared at the card in her hand, feeling a mixture of excitement and nervousness. Mr. Brooks, what do I know about apps and business ideas? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Thomas chuckled. You don't need to know everything, Clara. You have a gift for understanding people. That's what makes you special. As they reached the car, Thomas opened the door for Clara. Let's get you home, he said warmly. But in the back of his mind, an idea was forming. Clara's confidence tonight had inspired him, and he couldn't shake the feeling that she was destined for something far bigger than working as a maid. As the car drove through the city streets, Clara gazed out the window, her mind buzzing with possibilities. For the first time, she felt a spark of something new, hope that her life could change in ways she never expected. But little did Clara know, this night would set off a chain of events that would lead her on a journey far beyond anything she could imagine. The car glided through the shimmering lights of the city, the hum of the engine filling the silence between Thomas and Clara. As they neared her small apartment, Thomas broke the quiet. Clara, you've had a long night, but I hope you realize something. You're not limited by where you come from. The world is a lot bigger than you think, and I can see you doing amazing things in it. Clara gave him a faint smile, still clutching Chris's business card tightly in her hand. Thank you, Mr. Brooks, but it's hard to imagine a life different from the one I have now. Thomas nodded knowingly. I used to think like that too. Before my first big break, I thought success was meant for other people, not me. But what I've learned is that opportunity rarely knocks twice. When it does, you've got to grab it. Before Clara could reply, the car rolled to a stop in front of her modest building. She stepped out, the cool night air filling her lungs. As she turned back to thank Thomas, he smiled. Get some rest, Clara. I'll see you tomorrow. She watched the car drive away before making her way up the stairs to her tiny apartment. Once inside, Clara sat on her worn sofa, staring at the business card. The idea of helping Chris felt completely out of her depth, but a small voice in her mind whispered, "Why not you?" The next morning, Clara found herself pacing the kitchen while cleaning. She replayed the events of the previous night over and over, feeling both excitement and doubt battling inside her. Then her phone buzzed on the counter. It was a text from Chris. Good morning, Clara. Just wanted to say how much I appreciated meeting you last night. Whenever you're ready, I'd love to share my project with you. Clara stared at the message, her heart pounding. Part of her wanted to say no, to stay in her comfort zone. But another part of her, the part that had spoken boldly at the dinner, was curious. She took a deep breath and replied, I'd like to hear more about your project. Minutes later, her phone buzzed again. Great. Let's meet tomorrow for coffee. I'll explain everything. Clara sighed, feeling a mix of nerves and anticipation. She couldn't help but wonder what she was getting herself into. Meanwhile, back at his office, Thomas was scrolling through his calendar, thinking about the night before. Clara's confidence had sparked something in him, a curiosity about her untapped potential. He leaned back in his chair, a rare smile spreading across his face. She's going to surprise herself, he thought. But as the day unfolded, neither Clara nor Thomas could foresee how this decision would set off a series of events that would change both their lives in ways they never expected. The next morning, Clara sat at a small cafe across from Chris. The place was cozy, filled with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee and soft chatter from other tables. Chris spread out his laptop and some papers, his excitement almost contagious. "Okay, Clara," he began, leaning forward. "Here's the idea. My app is about making life simpler for people. Things like booking cleaners, getting groceries delivered, or finding trustworthy services in their area. But honestly, I think it's too complicated right now. I want to make it easy enough for anyone to use, no matter who they are." Clara sipped her tea, her brows furrowing as she looked at the sketches Chris showed her. "You're trying to help people like me, right? People who don't have time to figure out something fancy. It should feel friendly," she said thoughtfully. Chris's eyes lit up. "Exactly. Friendly. So what do you think needs to change?" Clara hesitated, tapping her fingers on the table. "Well, for one, these icons are too small, and the language, optimize scheduling efficiency, most people wouldn't know what that means. Maybe say something simpler, like make a plan or find help." Chris nodded furiously, jotting down her suggestions. "This is great, Clara. I've been so caught up in making it perfect that I forgot who I was designing it for. You're giving me exactly what I needed, real perspective." As they continued brainstorming, Clara felt a growing sense of confidence. Her insights, though simple, seemed to resonate deeply with Chris. For the first time, she realized her voice could make a difference. Meanwhile, back at Thomas's office, he was in the middle of a meeting with his board of directors. As the conversation drifted toward new business strategies, Thomas found his thoughts wandering back to Clara. He tapped his pen on the table, a small smile forming on his face. "Gentlemen," he interrupted, "I think we're missing something important in our approach. We need to step back and focus on understanding the people we're trying to reach. Sometimes the simplest ideas can have the biggest impact." His words caught the attention of the room. The directors exchanged glances, curious about Thomas's sudden shift in focus. But Thomas didn't elaborate, choosing instead to keep Clara's influence his own little secret for now. Later that evening, Clara returned home feeling proud but exhausted from her meeting with Chris. As she placed her silver bracelet on the counter, her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from Thomas. "Clara, I have something important I'd like to discuss with you tomorrow. It's about a new idea I'm working on. Let me know if you're free." Clara stared at the message, her heart racing. First Chris, and now Thomas. What was happening in her life? She replied with a simple, "Of course, Mr. Brooks," and set her phone down, her mind spinning with questions. As the night settled in, Clara couldn't help but feel that the path she was on was leading to something far greater than she could imagine. But what lay ahead was still unknown, a mixture of challenges, opportunities, and surprises that would test her like never before. The next morning, Clara arrived at Thomas's office, her heart pounding with anticipation. She still couldn't quite believe how much her life had changed in just a few days. She had gone from quietly cleaning the grand mansion to being part of important conversations with powerful people. Thomas greeted her with his usual calm demeanor, but with a spark of excitement in his eyes. "Clara, I've been thinking about how you handled yourself at the dinner and your insights with Chris's app idea. You've proven that fresh perspectives can truly make a difference. So I've decided to create something new, and I want you to be part of it." Clara stared at him, wide-eyed. "Me? But I don't know anything about business or or big ideas like yours. Thomas smiled reassuringly. That's exactly why I need you. I'm starting a foundation focused on helping people who are overlooked, those with unique talents and perspectives, like you, who just need an opportunity. Your voice and experiences will help guide us to make it truly impactful. Clara felt a wave of emotions, excitement, fear, and a strange sense of pride. But what would I even do? She asked hesitantly. You'll be my advisor, Thomas said simply. Someone to challenge the way we think, to ensure we're creating solutions that actually work for real people. It was overwhelming, yet Clara felt something stir inside her, a boldness that had been growing ever since that fateful dinner. She took a deep breath and nodded. I'll do my best, Mr. Brooks. Call me Thomas, he said with a smile. Welcome to the team, Clara. Over the following months, Clara found herself stepping into a world she had never imagined. She worked closely with Thomas, offering her thoughts and learning along the way. The foundation grew quickly, touching countless lives with its innovative programs and heartfelt mission. Clara's journey inspired many, showing that sometimes the most unexpected voices have the power to change the world. She no longer saw herself as just a maid, but as someone with value, courage, and the ability to make a difference. And as for Thomas, he had not only gained a brilliant advisor, but also discovered a deeper understanding of the people his business had always aimed to serve. Together, they made an unstoppable team, proving that success wasn't just about money or power, it was about heart, vision, and the willingness to see potential in everyone.